Hi everyone and welcome to my channel Karoline's Knits. My name is Karoline and I live in Scotland with my husband Ben and our dog Fibre. I am originally Danish but I've lived here in Scotland for 8 years. Welcome to a completely normal podcast episode. In a shocking ton of events, the sun is out so much that I actually can sit in my normal filming spot without either having to close some of the curtains and having weird shades or being so completely blinded that my eyes would probably start watering and I wouldn't be able to see anything. So I've moved us to a slightly different corner today. Fayla's out with her dog walker and I'm hoping to get this filmed with minimal puppy interruptions. As much as she was very cute in the last few videos, I think it's always nice to be filmed without feeling like you have to sort of rush through it. So welcome today. As usual, I should mention that all my links are always down below. I always link to whatever pattern I've knitted. I write down the yarn and the colours, and I usually link to Fibre as well if you'd like to see more precise quantities of any of the yarns, and otherwise you're always welcome to comment and I will always get back to you. Yeah, so I feel like I've been here so much, but still it feels like so long since I last filmed an episode. I think my last proper podcast episode was all the way back in November, and there's a very good reason for that, and I'm gonna move on to that now, which is that this sweater, which I should mention, the yarn was kindly gifted for testknit. This sweater has taken up basically all of my knitting time from probably about mid-November until mid-January, so it was a very big project and I didn't really knit much besides this in that time frame. This is the Sharpei Sweater. This is a sweater that is designed by the lovely Crea Dia Studio on Instagram, and the pattern was released in the middle of January, so it is now out if you would like to knit it, so I'll make sure to link it down below. I'll also put in a cutaway, but before I do, I was just going to show you the texture. So it's essentially these pleats, which if you see the inside, basically it's done by knitting one round of ripping, a few rounds of stockinette, and then you have a round where you basically knit all the purl stitches on the right side together. So you basically kind of give this condensed folded look. For meterage, it meant that I used, I think it was approximately 2,200 meters for each of the sort of yarns I used, which is probably about 1,000 meters, or was it 2,400? I think I basically used about double the amount of yarn I would usually calculate for a knit in my size, and it is in a size 3 with, that would give me about 20 centimeters positive ease, which for this kind of style, similar to some of the other job shoulder patterns I've done, just made a lot of sense because you do want that kind of proper drop in the shoulder. It is knit bottom up, and then when you've knitted the sleeves, you essentially seam them on. So the shoulders are binded off together using a Kitchener stitch, and then the sleeves are sewn on, which probably not the neatest work I've ever done, the whole seaming part, but I feel like on one side I did really well, and then on the other it wasn't as good, because you basically had to skip a certain amount of stitches on one side, etc. And yeah, so I kind of had to budge it a little bit, but you know, once it's kind of blocked, I don't really think you see it. As I said, the yarn quantities might slightly allude to the amount of work that went into it, so I feel like knitting wise, because of the plissés or pleats or whatever you want to call them, you are essentially knitting double the length, and so you're essentially knitting 2 sweaters by the time it's finished. So I used, I think it was about 11 balls of mohair to give you sort of like a ballpark of how much I used. The yarn was kindly sponsored by Unling, and I knitted in their number 10 and number 12. I think number 10 is the wool cotton blend and number 12 is the mohair, but it might be the other way around. So I held 2 strands of the wool cotton blend and then 1 strand of the mohair to create this fabric. If you've ever watched any of my knits I made this year, you will know that I always say I feel like I should make sure to always pick neutral patterns. That was a Freudian slip. Pick neutral yarns when I knit patterns, because I always get loads of use out of my more neutral knits. And obviously this isn't to most people very neutral. However, I find this colour is similar to other, I guess you can say, other sweaters that I've knit in the like I have a fern sweater from Missing for Olive in like a dark red. I have a sweater number 9 in a burgundy colour as well. And in my wardrobe, this kind of colour is one that I find really easy to wear. And obviously, if you do knit in colours, it's really individual what kind of colours fit well. For example, I've generally find blue less wearable for me, for example. But this kind of burgundy, I don't struggle to wear. Now the yarn, I feel like if it didn't have the pleats, it's when I was knitting it is actually not that tight a gauge, so it's knitted on 5.5mm needles around there. But obviously with the pleats it kind of condenses everything. So actually I think that yarn combination I would knit at knit on 5.5mm needles, unless I was doing these kind of pleats. But it does mean that while it's certainly like a heavy sweater, purely based on the meterage that's gone into it, it's not as dense as I think it could have been. Also because the pleats have some stretch, but not loads, especially not lengthways. And that's also the hard thing about knitting bottom up, in that you kind of have to guess if the lengths look good. So I knitted everything according to pattern. I did exactly the amount of pleats that the pattern specified, and the sleeves are good on me, which I think means they might be a little bit long on most people, but I guess it depends, because I think with this you do want a slight extra drape, because the way the pleats will kind of create almost a balloon effect. So yeah, maybe it'd be fine. But I do usually tend to have to lengthen the sleeves ever so slightly. What else is there to say? So since last time I knitted the sleeves, and I basically was trying to figure out how to do the sleeve increases, because as I say, you start at the cuff and go up. And together with Creatia Studio, I kind of made some suggestions, I guess you can call it, as to how I would knit the increases. So I think in the final pattern she has changed how it was originally described, and I think it makes the increase rounds a lot more easy to tackle. But in general, I find that the pleats are hard when you're first establishing them, because it's hard to see, kind of where the lines are. And I think I've spoken in previous podcasts that especially at the start of the body, I had many evenings where I managed like one pleat, because I would make a massive mistake, not realise it, having to tink back, then make another mistake, having to tink back, because this kind of texture, at least for me, wasn't one that I felt comfortable like dropping stitches in and fixing it that way. And sometimes, if you've made one mistake, say 50 stitches back, often it's easier to knit all the way back and fix it there, because otherwise you'd have to fix 50 stitches anyway, and usually it's not quicker. So I found, especially for the body, I do have some wonky pleats, and I definitely have some other places, but I found as I progressed I got better at kind of seeing or feeling the mistakes, and I think that made the knit so much more enjoyable. It's also much easier when you get to the upper part of the body where you knit it flat. I found that was much easier for some reason, probably because you're just managing a smaller round when you're knitting things down. But yeah, I found that was a lot quicker, even though technically you're knitting basically the same amount of stitches front and back as you were when the whole body was in the round. And then I actually found that the first sleeve took me a bit of time, but the second sleeve was quite quick. I think I knitted the second sleeve in about a week. Again, considering that's essentially like knitting 2 sleeves that aren't completely mindless, I still think that is pretty fast. So I would say that I think this sweater is brilliant if you are wanting to knit texture And if you like a project that's kind of moreish in the sense that you could, it's so easy to always say, well, I'm just going to get to the next pleat. Oh, but I may as well just do, you know, the round of ribbing before I put the project down. Or I may as well do, you know, just 1 or 2 stockingnettes. Or I may as well finish the pleat. And all of a sudden you've knitted several pleats. I think it would be a really good project for that. I also think another thing that would make this a really lovely knit. Now, I have really enjoyed this yarn and I quite enjoy it now it's finished. The mohair is the fluffiest mohair that I have ever worked with. Inling's mohair is just stunning. But I think this would be just as nice, if not nicer, in a slightly blown yarn. Something that has a lot less, like it's a lighter in itself. I think could be quite nice, light and fluffy, especially because it does get knitted together so densely. So I'm thinking something like Sandnes Course or Drops Air. I think Camel's Sniff Nook might be too thick for this, but I think something like that would be really, really lovely. And if you knitted it in something like Drops Air, while you need a lot of yarn, obviously it would be a lot more affordable than the Inling yarn combination, which for transparency I think ends up equaling with the amount I was sponsored about £200, probably less with the final yarn amount. So it's not cheap in that sense. So I feel like finding a yarn substitution isn't a bad idea. But I think she has suggested some other yarns, and I think she knitted her own sample in some kind of blown yarn and mohair. So yeah, it was definitely a big project, and there was definitely times when I kind of reached, like, you know, when a project just goes on. And I think sometimes with deadlines that's a good thing, that you're always feeling motivated to continue knitting and finishing it. But other times, if it takes a long time, you're kind of just ready for it to finish. And I feel like to start with, I was ready to finish it, but towards the tail end I actually quite enjoyed, especially the final sleeve. And I think it was made worse by the deadline. I you know, it was my 3rd deadline in a row, and I probably just hit a certain level of deadline fatigue. But now that it's done, I find myself waking up every morning in the home office and thinking, this is just perfect to wear. While it does have obviously a deeper and bulkier underarm, so far I've not struggled to wear it with my usual coat. So it has also been out for dog walks. So this is my first finished project of 2023. The next project I have finished will actually tie into a slightly longer discussion. So I'm just going to fish it all out here. After finishing this sweater, now I hate casting on new projects. Well, not hate it, but I'm not a big... I don't like starting projects, and I don't know what it is, but I hate that, like, coming to an end of the project and not immediately having something else to start working on. So if you ever watch back, you always notice that while usually I have 2 projects on the go at a time, and often that second project is just so that I have something else to pick up when I finish the first one. So one project will get most of the attention, and then the second one will get finished, but while I'm finishing the second one, I'll cast on the third on, etc. In between, like when I finished this sweater, I was keen to work on, you know, I did have sweater number 18 cast on, which I will show you in a minute. But I suddenly just got a craving for something small. If you haven't seen, I have actually posted a video every Sunday in January, and one of those was my 2023 winter knitting plans, and I pulled out a few yarns from Stash that I wanted to further, or not to further look at, that I was keen to start working with. Last week you might have seen that I did a tour of my yarn stash video and the truth of the size of my yarn stash. So if you want to know how many kilos it is, I will pop in a card so you can go watch it. But basically the conclusion is I do have a lot of yarn left, and I'm keen to work through it. And one of the yarns that I have been drawn to work with for a while, and that I also showed in that in the knitting plans video, is this. So I will just hold up this first. So this is the Sakami BFL Masham. I'm sure that didn't focus at all. I'll probably have to do B-roll for all of this anyway. This is the BFL Masham from the Handaya Sakami in the colour Assyria. And it's basically meant to be a non-superwash sock yarn, and I will talk a little bit more about the fibres in a minute. In the knitting plans video, I also said that I had some mohair left over in my stash that I would probably knit this with. So this mohair is the Lana Telia in the colour Red Squirrel, and it was actually left over from my first sweater. I do still have just under 150 grams of the Lana Avetta in Red Squirrel that I bought this with, but that's a traditional sock yarn, so it is a merino nylon mix, and so I kind of always knew that when the project was finished I'd kind of work with the Avetta for some kind of socks in the future. So that kind of left this leftover Tilia just in my stash, and in the stash video I also showed that I do have quite a lot of like lonely balls of mohair, or you know, like those kind of leftover things, and I don't always want to work them together with wherever they were held with, if they were held with something originally. So I think it's brilliant that it can be used in socks. So that's what I knitted. It does have a few dog hairs on it, so I do apologise, but these are the and I have some B-roll I'll pop in as well. These are the pearl socks by Gatto Slikt. My Norwegian is very good. It's probably Gatto Slikt. Anyway, the pearl socks are quite a I think they're quite an easy sock to knit, in that they, you know, they're kind of like a long shaft and just a normal toe, and then a short very heel, and then the sort of main thing that makes them pearl socks are that they have a break-in rib stitch all across them. Break-in rib stitch is quite an easy pattern to knit. It is one round of ripping and one round of just knit stitches, and so it does give a little bit more stretch, I think, than normal stockinette, and a bit of interest, but it's not something like, it's quite easy to see what round you're on when you're knitting it, so I find it's quite good for sort of mindless things. I have followed Garden Slicked for a while. She also test knits for My Favourite Things, which is how I think I originally found her, and I thought when these came out they looked very good. I was keen to find a short very heel pattern because I think so far I have found that to have a better fit for my feet. And I quite like, when I've tried it on compared to some of my other socks, this top part of the heel feels slightly longer, like it sits further up my foot. Now, I don't know if what's actually happened is that I have previously maybe been knitting my socks a teeny tiny bit too small. I think when you wear socks, even if you try them on, which you can if you start from the sort of cuff and go down, you can try it on quite easily. I think sometimes what happens is that as you wear the sock, it stretches sideways, and so the sort of length of the sock decreases. And so I think that might have been a reason why I found many heels not to fit that well. And then I just think I have quite slim heels. So yeah, so far so good. I haven't worn them yet because I did want to show them on the podcast, all gross and worn and pilly and all of those other things that I know will happen to these natural fibre socks. I should also say that these are the first socks that I knitted toe up. So the first sock, I honestly, it was like I'd never read a pattern before. I don't know why I found it. Everything was just so difficult, and so there are a few, like I think there's a dodgy increase. I'm not sure that I increased around the right stitch, etc. for the first sock, but at the end of the day, these are going to be on my feet. I don't think anyone's going to look at my feet and really realise, you know, anything about it. So I feel like I'm less worried about fixing mistakes in socks. They're also knitted on a 4mm needle, so these I think I knitted in like 3 days, and I could probably have knit them quicker if I hadn't gone to bed early on the Friday because I'd had a kebab and I felt a bit dodgy. So I could definitely have managed more. This leads me to sort of talk about my yarn choice. So if you've been following for a while, obviously I started knitting socks around this time last year. It was a big goal of mine to finally learn how to knit socks, and also to find socks that I thought really fitted my feet well. My gran knits. I can see if I can't pull out a pair. So I have I've always been really fortunate that my gran is a knitter, and the main thing she now knits in older age is socks. But they're kind of this style of they could use a deep heel, these ones, but they're kind of like a ribbed leg. They're very much like the Sunday socks, I think many people would say, but obviously she's knitted them well before Sunday socks were a pattern, and she tends to add a nice long leg for me and all of these things. But while I find them quite comfy to wear for like chilling at home, wearing in like my slippers and all of those things, I don't always find a fit absolutely perfect for me. So that's another reason why I have been kind of keen to try a few different kinds. So far, I think the best fitting pair that I have knit, I think these are still just freshly washed actually, so they again could probably use a deep heel, but they should be fine. These are the Soulmate socks by Woolly Knit, which I knit in a British wool, and so far I think these have been the biggest success sock wise. I actually really enjoyed this sock yarn, which does have nylon in it, and then it has like this like nice pattern. So that's probably been my most successful pair so far. So I feel like I'm still on the hunt to find the absolutely perfect pair. Today I am wearing my Morrison socks, which are a pattern that I found on Ravelry, and they're also knitted in non-superwash sock yarn, because along this process I kind of realised that I feel like for socks I often use them. My dream is to have socks that are hard wearing enough that they can indeed be worn in like boots on dog walks, etc., or worn with that kind of wear. But I think over time I've come to realise that I don't mind changing out of my woolly socks and putting on like a pair of tight fitting proper like socks for walks and all of that, so that you have less like excess fabric rubbing about. And because I especially have some socks from Adidas that have a high leg, and they're just so comfy. They just sit exactly like I want them to. So I might try and see if I can make a sock version of that one day, but not yet. So anyway, all of this has led me, and I think it really began last year, to start thinking about what fibres that I use for my socks. And I think as time has progressed, I have become less wool sensitive. So all of a sudden, you know, there would have been a time I would never have considered a yarn combination like this, because I would not have been able to wear them on my feet. I would have found it too itchy. But I have just become much more tolerant of wool. I don't know how I've done it. If you watch back, I used to not even be able to wear my hair really against like naked skin, especially not around my shoulders and my chest, where I tend to have eczema. I used to find it unbearably itchy, and I just don't anymore. Even the British wool from Woolly Knit, absolutely fine on my skin, never feel sensitive anymore. So I also feel like I'm more in the right place now to start really exploring other options. So I'm really excited to have knitted up this pair, and that also means in all of this like search for a different type of fibre that I've really kept my little ears open for other people talking about non-superwash socks and what they've found. And if you watch Knitting Traditions, who I think it's fair to say she's knit up many socks in her lifetime, she always says that, you know, a bit of extra mohair silk can provide a little bit extra, work a little bit like nylon, especially the silk, in keeping all the fibres together. And it also creates a really stunning halo. But I think the thing that really made me excited to work on these socks, in contrast to other projects, was actually that I was watching a new to me podcast. I've known that she made a podcast a while ago, and it's just been on my to watch list and hasn't been watched. Oh, I'm sitting, everything just went itchy. So as I was saying, I hadn't watched the podcast yet, but it's been on my list for a long time, is my knitting friend Susie from Sheep and Stitches. I'll link both her Instagram and her YouTube down below. Susie is a veterinarian that lives in the Scottish borders, and I think she specialises mainly in farm animals, potentially mainly sheep. And it's a really interesting perspective because she's grown up on a sheep farm and she just has so much knowledge about different sheep breeds and different wools and fibres, and she spins her own fibres and all of these things, and it just feels, you know, the more I knit, the more I become aware that, you know, I'm sure most of us turned to knitting because it was a way to work on, at least many of us recent knitters, at least for me, it was a little bit of a rebellion against fast fashion, against you know, buying a cheap acrylic sweater in Primark that you wash 1 or 2 times and then it's not nice anymore and you just throw it out. And you know, and the more I've learnt about fibres, the more I realise why man-made fibres have, you know, especially the sort of like plastic based ones, you know, they're just so terrible for the environment. They have very little long-term use, and you know, it brings the cost down, and the cost of that is obviously that you can buy and buy and buy, but you don't get the longevity out of these garments. Whereas, you know, everything I've ever knitted, despite many of them having been worn a gazillion times, they are still in very, very good condition. So a lot of my stash is foreign fibres in different descriptions, and again, I think in all of this it would go completely against that, thinking about the environment and the future of fibres and those kind of industries to like get rid of it all. So I'm absolutely not going to do that. However, I do think going forward, I just want to be more aware of especially the British domestic breeds. You know, Scotland and probably England and Wales, but obviously I know in Ireland, but I obviously know Scotland the best. There's sheep everywhere in Scotland. Coming from Denmark, I honestly am not sure if I'd ever seen that many sheep. I can't recall if I'd ever seen like a field of sheep. I don't think so. But moving here, there's literally sheep everywhere. And you know, you go for a walk here and you see, you know, we have several fields here that are mainly sheep, and we also have cows. And I just realised, you know, we have, you know, nowadays most British fibres aren't being used for garments, and that a big, you know, breeding selection criteria is mainly the amount of meat you can get out of a sheep. I was watching This Farming Life on, which is a BBC 2 documentary, or like TV series, I guess you can call it. And it really just opened my eyes to the hardship of farming in the UK, and also just how wonderful these animals are and what we can do to preserve them. You know, shearing sheep isn't something that causes them great distress, and it's not, you know, not something I consider dangerous. So anyway, all of this to say that I think I was already kind of primed to be more interested in natural fibres. And then when I watched Susie's podcast and heard her speak a lot about different breeds and different mixes and all of these things, I just felt really inspired to at least have myself a better understanding of different fibres. Because I feel like in the fibre community, you know, the fibres that we all know very well are probably merino. Obviously the mohair and silk blends are really popular. Maybe some of us have worked with some nondescript alpaca, and then we're kind of through, I feel like, the very, very big fibres. Maybe if you're really into your wools, you've maybe worked with some Shetland wool and some blue-faced Leicester, but then I feel like that's probably the most domestic wools you've worked with, and there's just so many more than that. And especially for socks, there are actually quite a few, you know, many of the domestic breeds seem to be quite well suited to non-superwash sock knitting. So one evening I was googling non-superwash sock yarn and kind of starting that research process, because by no stretch of the imagination an expert. I will leave that to Susie, but I think still it's always good to be informed about the choices that you make. And if I am to start looking at more non-superwash yarns, and especially for socks, because it somehow to me feels less risky to wear a fibre that you're not that used to on your feet. And often if they are more expensive, because often domestically produced fibres are, then at least a sock quantity isn't necessarily that much. So I was Googling and I found a blog by someone called the Winwick Mum. I will link her down below. So she has done some tests with different non-superwash sock yarns, and she unfortunately most of those sock yarns are no longer available, but there are a few yarn shop that stocks those kind of socks. So I will link her blog down below and her sort of overview, and you can read about her experiences. She says she always wears through her socks on the big toe, and actually I am not very hard wearing on my store-bought socks. I actually tend to be able to use socks, I think, for much longer than most people. I have socks in my drawer that are frequently used, that I've had for many years, so I don't think I'm particularly rough on my feet for whatever reason, probably because I spend so much time sitting down knitting. But she said that, for example, she tends to wear through the toe, so she talks a lot about reinforcing different socks. Now, one of the socks she had picked was from a website that I think is called Northern Yarn, and the lady on that shop had recommended a book to her, which I decided to the owner had recommended because it talks about different breeds, both socks. It talks both about sheep breeds and goats and alpacas and different forms of fibres, and it's called I'll just pop in a little picture of the front page. It's called the Fleece and Fibre Source book, and I think it says that there's basically more than 200 different breeds in it. I had a look at the hardcover version in the UK. I think came up to about 20 quid, but the Kindle version is only £4, and if you're like me, it's still in of an iPad, it's not difficult to read at all, and you can still you can still see all the photos and all of these things if you'd so like. So I'm currently reading that on my iPad. I'm only 17% in, so basically to say that I haven't read that much so far, but I have already learnt so much, and I found it really interesting. Now, one of the authors are quite a keen spinner, and I have no desire to learn to spin, so some things I slightly skip over because I know I'm probably not going to be spinning this fibre anytime soon. But if that is something you're interested in, I would really recommend that you take a look at that book. And I also looked up Blueface Leicester and Masham out of curiosity of what came up. So Blueface Leicester, merino technically is a domestic yarn, in that it a lot of merino sheep live on the Falkland Islands, which is off the coast of Argentina, but it is British. However, I feel like calling that domestic is quite a long stretch. You're not just gonna go in the car and drive to the Falkland Islands. So Blueface Leicester in that book is kind of described as having quite a lot of similarities to merino, but just being ever so slightly harder wearing, but still having a softness, a luster, and being a really wonderful fibre to work with. And I think Blueface Leicester is quite a common fibre to find also on its own. So I found that very interesting. And actually it is a fibre that is recommended in socks. Now, I don't think this yarn is particularly tightly spun, which would have helped with wear, so we'll have to see. But that's one of them. And then Masham was a fibre that I had personally not heard of before. And when I looked it up, it is basically a term to talk about like a mule, so essentially a sheep that's mixed of a few different breeds. Now, from what I remember, without looking it up again, I can't remember the sort of breeds that are usually mixed, but I don't think it's a given what the masham mix is. It could be a few different ones, but nevertheless it's essentially a mix, and also that they're basically mixed because they create good wool as well, and also should be well suited for socks. So they are, at least on paper, good sock yarns. So I have to see what it says about mohair and silk. I've not reached that part yet. I have currently started in the sort of coarser, because I've just started from the beginning, the sort of coarser end of the scale. So I've read about the black-faced breeds, so they tend to be more, probably be less for soft garments and more for rugs and all of these things. So yeah, I've started there, and I will slowly but surely read my way through it. And I know not everything will stick, but even just getting a greater understanding, and then once it's on the iPad or on Kindle in general, I can always look up fibres. I was watching Rebecca's latest podcast where she was talking about she's knitting her Dolly sweater up in a Jacob yarn, and Jacob is also a breed that came up quite frequently as very, very well suited to socks. So I'd be keen to try some of that as well. Yes, so I feel like that's enough about socks, but I'll make sure to link Susie's channel down below so you can check her out. We also really got on because she has a border collie mixed dog just like me, though hers is mixed with a Kelpie, I think, so will be slightly crazier than my half lab. But anyway, and enough about socks, and I'll definitely keep you posted on how they wear, and any thoughts and feelings on different fibres, unusual fibres that you work with and really enjoyed. I would actually really like to hear if you would like to comment. So what else have I been working on? These are kind of just quick updates on how much progress I've been making. So my current big whip that I took a short break from while knitting to socks and that I am now back to is my sweater number 18 by My Favourite Things Knitwear. So you can tell this is the back, picked up the shoulder lines, and I've started the body, and it's just slowly but surely growing. This is, and in speaking of non-domestic fibres, this is probably it. This is baby cereal packer silk, hand dyed by Sakami as well, and then it's one other strand of Lana Gatto feeling, which is a cashmere merino silk blend. Well, I think that the composition goes 70% merino, 20% silk and 10% cashmere, so very, very, very soft. And I've just slowly been working my way at this. You can tell I've not weaved in a single end yet, and it doesn't look all that nice yet because I have no arms and I have no neckline, so it kind of just has, you know, like a big empty hole in the middle here. It also, you can already tell how much stretch this is going to have. So I think when I block it, I will probably not knit it too long, but I will block it quite a lot lengthways, because my fear is that if it kind of grows sideways, that the gauge will just not be tight enough. I actually think this yarn would have done quite well being knitted at an even tighter gauge. So I met the original gauge on the recommended needles, but I thought the fabric would be nice if I just went down, like, I think it was half a needle size, so that's what I did. So hopefully the next time I see you, I seem to be able to add like a few centimeters each night, so I don't think there'll be much left of the body, to be honest, once I really, you know, crack on with it. I don't have that many repeats left, and then obviously it's just sleeves, but I think these have quite like they have quite nice decreases in them, so it shouldn't be too much work. And what else is there to say? So far I've really enjoyed it. The pattern is very easy to follow because there's both charts and written descriptions. I have followed the written descriptions because it requires less brain power. So it's very, very easy pattern because it's you know, it's not complicated at all what you're doing. So I would also really recommend it if you are slightly newer knitter. The other whip I am slowly but surely working on, that has been put a little bit on hold and kind of been mainly like a take with me knit, is my next pair of penny gloves. So I have already finished one pair, they're feeling a little bit tight, but I know with the wash and wear they'll probably stretch. So these are knitted in Ise Alpaca 1, which is basically some yarn I had left over from a previous project. It's really lovely and woolly. It's really hard to see stitches in yarn like this, I have to say. This is in the colour 4S, I think, so it's a nice dark grey. My previous penny gloves are a light grey with a white mohair, and once I kind of started really using them on dog walks, especially this upper part of the hand, have turned quite grim. So I think a darker colour would be nice, and maybe one to, I can, you know, use one for a little while and then wash the other one and switch around. So yeah, I am not too far away from having finished the sort of like wrist part, and then it's just time for the hand. So yeah, this is not a whip I have any hurry to finish. I'm just slowly but surely knitting it. Together with that, I also have the camisole test knit for my favourite things that wear that I never finished, which I'm also, excuse me, slowly but surely working way at, but I didn't bring that through because I don't think it's progress you can really tell a difference with. And then the final thing is I thought I'd talk about what's coming up on my needles. So I recently did a swatch. My lovely friend Sophie is bringing out her pattern for the Semper Sweater v-neck on Saturday, I think it is. And if you watched for a while, you may know that I got married in July, and for my wedding I had a few knitting friends there. So Sophie was one of them, together with Lissy from Hive Knits, and Laura from Penrose Knits. Simona from Knit couldn't be there, but she was, I'm sure, there in spirit. And they gave me some yarn as a present. So this is hand-dyed Siri Alpaca silk in the colour Gilly Do, which is our wedding venue. And Sakami kindly also gifted me some camel silk as part of it. So in some ways it's gifted, but in some ways it is not. These yarns have been meant to go together from the very beginning. And I have, this was also one of the combinations that I talked about in my 2023 winter knitting plans. And I'm just keen to get it started, simply because this is very special yarn to me. And as much as I'm enjoying sweater number 18, I am kind of ready for a proper mindless project. Now, I might have a test knit coming up, I'm not sure, we'll have to see, which I also think will be quite mindless. So this could equally turn into a cast on that, like sweater number 20 just stretches, sweater number 20 to sweater number 18, that just stretches over a few months, but I am okay with that. But I thought the best place to start was to actually get swatched up, and then I could also get a better feel, at least, for what the Suri looks like. I think the Suri will be a lot busier when the knit is proper finished, because proper finished when you have like a bigger garment, simply because there's loads of speckles in it. But this is what I have so far. Excuse me. I might put up a photo. I did put up a post the other day with this, and it's so soft. So I'm really excited to cast that on, and that's kind of what's on the horizon at the moment. Usually I'm not that keen on casting things on, but I have proper just decided to start every single project at the moment, and as that's not something I feel particularly often, I'm probably going to lean into it. So don't be surprised if I turn up next time and I have like 10 projects on the go, because I know I'll slowly but surely work through them, but I'm just keen to really work through what I have. And that's all the knitting content for today. I feel slightly tired. I ended up staying up much later last night than planned, and today had to be the filming day. So I hope I've not been too erratic. I felt a little bit erratic today. To be honest, this whole period I felt a little bit erratic. I feel like I've spoken about it on here before, but I went through, especially during COVID, very long periods of what was probably what probably would be classed as clinical depression that I just ignored existed. And I feel like it's not really until 2022, sort of 2 years into it, that I slowly but surely started reaching that point that I was like, if this doesn't get better soon, it is something I will need professional help to tackle. And these things aren't linear, and they aren't overnight things, and there's no shame, or there shouldn't be any shame in being mentally ill, but I feel like I was still feeling a little bit stubborn. And it's funny because if you didn't know, I have a degree in psychology, and while I don't work as a psychologist, I still think of all the people in the world I should probably know better. But nevertheless, I feel like 2022 was really the year I started realizing that, you know, things had to slowly but surely change. And as I said, it's not linear. You don't wake up one day and then you are magically better and everything is perfect. It's a slow grind. It is thinking about your what's good for you longer term than what short term feels good. When I feel really poorly, things like getting up and out of bed is virtually impossible, but I can't sleep at night time, so I stay up. So I end up not sleeping very well, and I struggle to get proper ready, so I spend my days in, the same kind of, pajamas day after day. Even though I know I should leave the house, I don't get it done. I've had periods where, walking the dog can feel like a struggle, and most of the time I do force myself to, but there's definitely been weeks where maybe there's a day or two where I haven't taken her, where I really didn't have, there wasn't a good reason not to, especially for my own sake. And I feel like at the start of this year, I have really hit my stride a lot better over Christmas. I took some proper rest and relax time, and I think it was just what I needed. The good thing about having a dog is that you still need to leave the house even if you don't think you want to. So that's been good for me during that period of doing very little. But I also made some career decisions. I had considered going for a different job, but decided not to, and I kind of found peace with that decision of where I am and where I'm going sort of professionally. I don't speak about my job on here loads, and I don't think there's any need to, but there's that. And then Ben and I had actually decided that we were going to get a second dog, and he was meant to come home next week. And after a few days of kind of stewing it over, we had a really big and deep chat about the future and what our life is going to be like. And I think we both realised that when you get a puppy, your life gets put on hold for a few months. It's just how it works. Puppies are time consuming, they're difficult, and they require a lot of time and effort and money. And I think we kind of ticked the boxes of, like, if you Google should you buy a second dog, we ticked all of those. Fela is really friendly, she likes other dogs, she doesn't have any major issues, we don't have major training issues. With my job, I would have the time to spend with the puppy. Financially, we could find the money and all of these things, but then we just realised the effect of putting our life on hold for another year, because a lot of COVID has felt like putting life on hold. And we just decided that it was the perfect puppy, but the wrong time. And I'm not going to lie, I was completely heartbroken. I cried for a solid 2 days. I honestly was so upset, and it wasn't because it was the wrong choice, but sometimes taking the right choice can still be really painful. And luckily the breeder is also Fela's dog walker, and she took it very nicely when we said why we decided not to go for it in the end. I actually cried more over this puppy than I did over my ex-boyfriend, if that tells you anything about him. But nevertheless, it was the right choice, and I think I kind of had to find peace with that. And I think it's left me feeling quite just like, looking for the right word. I've just kind of been thinking a lot about my future and where I'm going and what I enjoy and all of those things. And I really want this year to be the the year where I find a lot more peace with things. So I've decided that my word for 2023 is serenity. I basically don't want to be, I feel like in the past I might have been too keen to be like, this is the year I pushed myself and I really moved forward and I accomplished all of these crazy things, and that's not really my goal this year. My goal this year is much more just to let the small things go, accept that I feel how I feel, acknowledge it, and then move on from it. Not getting hung up in small things and not beating myself constantly with all of the things I'm not managing, but instead focusing what I am managing. And with that, there are lots of things in my life that I need to stay on top of so that I don't feel depressed again. And that's not to say that, being depressed is a choice, because I do not think so. However, I do think there are things I can do to make a choice to at least see if I can sort of stop it, I guess. So easy things are, I need to stick to a morning routine. I need to get up at a certain time and be more normal. So I've been working on that. Not perfect. Just this morning, I accidentally switched the alarm off and fell back asleep, which I haven't done. It never happens to me, but I did. But in general, I have been putting my phone not right next to me, so that the phone is put away and switched off earlier than my bedtime. I've been reading the Fibre book, because those kind of factual books makes me the perfect kind of sleepy, whereas I find that sort of fictional books, sometimes it's like, you just want to read the next chapter. So I've been charging my phone away from me so that I have to get out of bed in the morning, and then I've been also really trying to focus on begrudgingly walking downstairs, making a cup of tea and breakfast, and then usually getting back into bed with the dog, because she's not a morning dog at all. And then we have a little snuggle and I do some knitting, and it's just a quieter, calmer way to start my day. And I think I need to continue down that track. I need to nail the morning routine slowly but surely, where, maybe my dream would be that I am one of those people who wake up at 5 o'clock and run a marathon and then go to a CrossFit class and clean the whole house and take Fela for a long walk, and then it's like only 7 o'clock in the morning. But I'm just not going to be that type of person. So I'm looking for those smaller wins. And that might also mean in time that I get more or less time for knitting. I don't know. Because knitting brings me joy, but I think it's always a balance between it brings me joy, but it shouldn't stop me from doing other things, if that makes sense. So it's a big journey, and luckily these first few weeks of the new year have been very good for me. And no life is perfect, and mine certainly isn't, but they've definitely been better than many other weeks, and I'm very appreciative of that and grateful for that as well, because I don't take it for granted at all. And that was a really long chat about mental health, wasn't it? But I know I do receive messages when I've spoken about mental health on the podcast before, and I think it is really important to talk about and be really transparent about, because again, what you kind of see is a glossy representation of life, and not necessarily the full representation of it. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll be back if it's your first time here, and I will see you again soon. Bye.